in addition to trying to develop the science base for underpinning all food regulations, for doing things like reviewing, evaluating and revising food regulations, developing awareness programs and so on. The task of the Food Safety Authority is really enormous, and it's only getting off the ground at the present moment. We don't have anybody in the room from the Food Safety Authority. There are 11 staff in the Food Safety Authority. We don't have anybody in the room today from the authority because today they're having a changeover of the chief executive. The chairman of the board is changing. This morning it's the turn of the previous chairman. There will be a new chairman taking over this afternoon. So really all the staff are involved with that activity, and they haven't been able to join us today. Hopefully we'll have somebody here tomorrow from the Food Safety Authority. But what I want to do is to give you a quick overview of what we're doing there. But first of all, let's start with the very basics. Like, why are we all in this room? You know, why are we bothering with food safety in the first place? Is it something that's important? Is it something that we should be ignoring and getting on and doing other jobs? It's all about protection. And we're protecting many, many different segments of society. It's also making the food control agencies accountable. And accountability and transparency are key to implementing a food control program. And if I was to say, as an outsider looking in, accountability and transparency are areas that really have to be improved here in Bangladesh. In other countries, it's very similar. You know, accountability and transparency need to be improved. But certainly, if Bangladesh is to have a world-class food control, food regulatory structure, accountability and transparency are key. And certainly if you look in the international trade agreements like the SPS agreement of WTO and so on, accountability and transparency particularly are in there as key factors. So that would be number one. I would say number two, your citizens eat and drink about 5 times every day. And if you were to put that in perspective with respect to food safety, that means there's 80 million opportunities for your citizens to become ill. And that's every day of the week. So if you have an unfit, safe food supply, you have the opportunity to make, you know, you have an opportunity 88 million times to make people sick. That is a huge number. And it's beholding on the authorities and the food sector to ensure the safety of the food supply. If you look at your economy, let me say your agriculture sector is probably, you know, it's of critical importance to the economy. 87% of all the rural dwellers work in agriculture. Agriculture is responsible for probably 16-17% of your GDP. I think it's 48% of your workforce work in agriculture. So if anything threatens your agricultural sector, your whole economy is in dire straits. If you look at global food consumers, we've heard this morning about Bangladesh exporting food. There's a huge drive for exporting of fishery products, particularly shrimp, to Europe and elsewhere. We've heard about mangoes being exported. But really, we need to protect the health of consumers of the food from Bangladesh overseas, and we also need their confidence. If they don't have confidence in the safety of the products that are leaving Bangladesh, you can forget your export trade. And that brings us on to your national reputation. There are many other countries in the world producing the same type of products, shrimp, mangoes and so on, that Bangladesh produces. And certainly the world market is very, very fickle. And if you have problems with one country, you'll very quickly source from another. I know that from personal experience. If there's ever a problem with foods from Ireland, other countries are finding an opportunity to export. So if somebody sees your mangoes are in difficulty, India will be there saying, here, we can supply safe mangoes, and so on. So really, produce or products from Bangladesh and the reputation, they have to be really up there with the best. In addition, your tourism sector. How many people knew that 2 days ago was World Tourism Day, the 26th of September? And your tourist board, the agency that's in charge of tourism, was pushing Bengali Food Festival, trying to stimulate a situation where you'd attract in visitors. But really, your visitors are the ambassadors when they return home. If somebody is on Facebook or on Twitter saying, I've just been to Dhaka on a holiday and I've got a really bad dose of diarrhea, don't come for your holidays to Dhaka. I mean, that's the type of thing that's happened. You want the reverse to be said. You want visitors saying, we've been to Dhaka, we had some lovely food, we'd all advise you to come to Dhaka for your holidays. That's really the position you want to be in, rather than the reverse. But certainly, if people are coming, if your visitors are coming and they're getting ill from unsafe food, you're never going to get your tourism industry off the ground. And the tourism industry is worth billions of dollars. All you have to do is look at your neighbours, look at Myanmar, look at Thailand, and their industry, their tourism industry, attracts in millions or billions of dollars. And it's really about the food that's part of the culture. So essentially, if you don't have a safe food supply, you're never going to develop your tourism. And really, I suppose the bottom line here is why Bangladesh needs safe food. It's really about the future. It's about protecting, the younger people. And if you looked at the data that was presented from ICEDR, a lot of the younger people were suffering from these syndromes of watery diarrhea and so on. So really, it's the children. If you look at things like stunting, if you look at child development, if you look at malnutrition and so on, most of it is in children. And again, you can relate it to safe food, along with hygiene and sanitation and so on. But really, it's beholding on us all to upgrade the standards of hygiene and sanitation in the food supply and get the industry to do the same. Okay, that's the advertisement for food safety over. The previous speaker said we need farm-to-fork control. And really, that's exactly what we do need. And that is what FAO is trying to introduce here, is the farm-to-fork control. It's starting with the feed and the fertilizer, and all the biosecurity on farm is working all the way through storage and processing, all the way through to distribution, wholesale, retail, and the consumer's plate. There's no point in having a really good control, let's say, on the farms, and everybody else will contaminate the food on the way to the consumer. You really have to have a farm-to-fork food control regulatory structure, and that's key. And that is one of the, if I would say, that's one of the tasks of the Food Safety Authority, is to coordinate the food control efforts and activities of all those agencies that are involved in regulating the food chain. And essentially, it's the job of the industry to produce safe food. It's not the job of the regulators. The job of the regulators is to set the standards, monitor that the industry is complying with those standards, and enforce the standards. That's essentially it. But really, food safety is the responsibility of the food industry. And it's one of the tasks of the regulatory agencies to get that message across. If you look at the key components of a food control system, and really this is the basis of the work we're doing with the Bangladesh Food Safety Authority, FAO and WHO have developed guidelines for strengthening food control structures. And you could distill their guidelines down to this one slide. At the center, you have the food control management structure. This is the institutions, the agencies and so on, the government agencies, like DLS, like the Ministry of Health and so on, fisheries, are in the core centre looking after food control management. Food legislation is key, and a very large component of the overall food control system. Food inspection, enforcing those regulations, laboratories, testing foods and so on for compliance, and then you have this information, education and consumer communication component of the overall structure. But really, this is where we are with the Bangladesh Food Safety Authority, trying to develop these different components. And really linking the government agencies, we talk about the food chain. Well, here the Bangladesh Food Safety Authority is in the centre as the link in the chain that's holding all the others together. And if you read the Food Safety Act of 2013, the very first line of the Act says that the intention of the Act is to establish an authority to coordinate the control functions of all of the other agencies right across the whole of the food chain. And really, that's what the Bangladesh Food Safety Authority is trying to do. It has a long way to go, and it needs a lot of help. While the Act says that that's the role of the authority, it doesn't say how it's got to be done. And that's the real challenge. And there's one of the committees, the National Food Safety Management Coordination Council, met last week. That's one of the committees where all representatives of all the agencies in charge of food control sit on that committee. And they agreed a framework for cooperation. And that's the first stage of a fairly long process to develop a mechanism for everybody to cooperate together. So that framework now has been agreed. It will have to be modified and tweaked and so on, but at least we're moving in the direction of putting some formal structure in place to cooperate. And really, the role of the authorities, and I said, the first line of the Act, this is what it's about. If we look at food legislation, you have primary legislation. It should be clear and concise. Unfortunately, the primary legislation here is not really so clear and concise. You have secondary legislation and the regulations, and really this is an area where the Bangladesh Food Safety Authority is working, and we have Maya Sandik here, who's very much involved with producing those regulations. And then we have codes of practice. We're developing codes of practice against those regulations, so there will be a common understanding for consistent enforcement of the regulations right across the food chain. Now, what I've just said in that sentence is probably 2 to 3 years' work. So there's a huge task ahead of us in putting a structure on the food laws and regulations into the future. And the role of the Bangladesh Food Safety is setting standards, national regulatory food standards. And the type of work that we're trying to do with the authority at the present moment is looking at different segments of the food chain and doing what I would call regulatory gap analysis. Looking at the regulations, analysing the regulations, evaluating them, benchmarking them against international norms, and then suggesting ways forward to improve. So, a huge job of work. What underpins consumer confidence? Really, it's independent science-based regulations. And that is something that we really do have to promote here in Bangladesh. That you have to have the scientific basis, the scientific evidence for risk management decisions, for closing food premises, for taking foods off the market, or for any form of enforcement action. You must have the scientific basis to do it. And if you don't, if you just have circumstantial evidence to do it, it can be a form of harassment of the industry. So really, the Bangladesh Food Safety Authority has 7 different technical committees, scientific committees. They've just put the rules together as to how to form those committees. Those committees should be formed in the next 3 to 4 months, and those committees will be providing the scientific base to underpin the regulations. But really, if you don't have science-based regulations and you have just circumstantial evidence, it would be seen as a form of harassment of the industry when different agencies go and do control activities. Coordination of the workforce, well, there's a component in Section 51 of the Food Safety Act, is about appointment of food inspectors and the type of work the inspectors do, taking samples, inspecting food premises and so on, the enforcement actions. There's also a section in there for appointing analysts. So this is again a huge job of work, and we have been doing some training activities with our colleagues on the other FAO project on training food inspectors. But we've done a very small amount. There's much more work involved in this activity. And we've heard a lot about the laboratories and so on, and sampling and surveillance and monitoring. That is really key. And strengthening the laboratory, the food safety laboratory network is essential. We've done a very quick evaluation of all the laboratories, all the government laboratories in the country, and really you don't have the laboratory capacity to support your regulatory structure to you know, if I can say, modern standards. I think we've heard about levels of residues and so on, but really for testing all of that on a regular basis, you really do need a strong, accredited laboratory network. One of the things we are doing is we're looking to the next generation, and we're working with the Bangladesh Agricultural University to set up an undergraduate degree in food safety, risk management and regulatory affairs. And this is an activity of FAO, and we've contracted the Dublin Institute of Technology, who train all the food inspectors, not alone for Ireland, but for the UK and in some other European countries. They will take their food inspectors course and fine-tune it to develop a course here. They're developing a model course curriculum, and hopefully sometime in the new year that course will be up and ready to run. And Professor Cameron is very much involved in this activity, developing this undergraduate course. But really it is to train the next generation of food inspectors. That is the plan for this particular course. When we talk about food safety awareness, and this is key to the activities of the Bangladesh Food Safety Authority, we're going to purchase 2 mobile laboratories. And this is a mobile laboratory from Indonesia, and my very good friend Kalim Nababan very kindly hosted a group of experts from Bangladesh to visit for a study tour, so they could look at the food control system in Indonesia, and this is what we saw. So here we have a mobile laboratory which can drive around wet markets and do testing of things like, we talked about formalin, mycotoxins, pesticides. There are rapid test kits based on the ELISA system that you can actually use that will give you quite reliable results. Whether you take enforcement action on the back of those results is really up to yourselves, but I haven't seen a mobile laboratory that's accredited to ISO 17025, yes. So it's, but at the same time, you can get very reliable results. And somebody was talking about formalin and rapid test kits for formalin. This is a rapid test kit that is used in Indonesia. It's produced by a company called Merck, and it will give you very reliable results in terms of levels of formalin. So you do have a rapid test kit. It's nothing like the test kits that have been used by the people who've been going around the markets destroying mangoes. That's nearly witchcraft. Now this is science, and we need to base our, as I said, our regulatory actions on sound scientific evidence. I think there would be sufficient, this test would be sufficient to take some regulatory action. If you find levels of formalin that are sky high in some, don't ask me, fish or produce, it's certainly not there by accident, is what I would say. And finally, I hope this is going to work. This is a small app that we have with the Food Safety Authority. Is it going to work? I wonder.